The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Evelyn Norton's bonnet as she stood in the dusty street of Concord, Texas, clutching her worn basket of eggs like they were made of solid gold, because to her, they might as well have been. She had counted them 3 times that morning, 24 perfect brown eggs, the result of weeks of careful rationing of grain and water for her small flock of hens, and she desperately hoped they would be enough to trade for the candles she needed to see her father through his final days. The general store loomed before her, its wooden sign creaking in the hot September wind of 1876, and she took a deep breath before stepping inside, knowing that Jacob Henderson, the store owner, drove a hard bargain even with those who were struggling. The interior of the store offered little relief from the heat, but at least the shade provided some comfort as Evelyn approached the counter where Henderson stood, his thick arms crossed over his barrel chest. He was a man who had grown prosperous in Concord while others barely scraped by, and he knew it, wearing his success like a badge of honor that gave him the right to squeeze every last bit of value from those who came to him in need. "Afternoon, Miss Norton," Henderson said, his voice flat and businesslike. "What brings you in today?" Evelyn set her basket on the counter with careful precision, knowing that even one broken egg would reduce her bargaining power. "I need candles, Mr. Henderson. My father cannot read his Bible in the dark, and the nights are growing longer. I have 24 eggs here, fresh this morning." Henderson peered into the basket without touching it, his expression unchanging. "Eggs are common this time of year, Miss Norton. Everyone's hens are laying well before the cold comes. I can give you 3 candles for the lot." 3 candles would not last a week, and Evelyn felt her heart sink even though she had expected this. Her father, bedridden with the consumption that was slowly stealing his breath and his life, found comfort only in reading scripture and the letters her mother had written him before her death 5 years ago. He needed light to read, and Evelyn needed to provide it for him, no matter the cost to her pride. "Mr. Henderson, these eggs are of the finest quality," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My hens are well fed and the eggs are large. Surely they are worth more than 3 candles." "4 then. That is my final offer." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, doing calculations in her head. 4 candles, burned carefully, might last 10 days if she rationed them strictly. Then she would be back here again, with another basket of eggs, hoping her hens kept producing and that Henderson's prices did not worsen. It was a cycle she could not sustain, but what choice did she have? The small farm her father had built was failing without his strong hands to work it, and she was only one woman trying to do the work of 3 people. "I will need to think about it," she said quietly, knowing it was a futile attempt to gain time she did not have. "Suit yourself," Henderson replied, already turning his attention to another customer who had entered the store. Evelyn picked up her basket and moved toward the door, her mind racing through possibilities that all led nowhere. She could try to sell the eggs to individual families, going door to door, but that would take hours she did not have, and there was no guarantee she would find buyers. She could attempt to trade with the traveling merchants who sometimes came through Concord, but none were expected for at least a week. The situation felt hopeless, and she blinked back tears of frustration as she stepped back into the sunlight. "Excuse me, miss," a deep voice said from her left, and Evelyn turned to see a man leaning against the hitching post, his tall frame relaxed but his eyes alert. He was a cowboy. That much was clear from his worn leather chaps, dusty boots, and the way he wore his hat low to shade his face from the brutal Texas sun. But there was something different about him, a quality she could not quite name, that set him apart from the usual drifters and ranch hands who passed through Concord. Yes, she asked, clutching her basket a bit tighter, unsure of his intentions. The cowboy straightened up, and Evelyn could see that he was probably in his mid-20s, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of strong coffee. A thin scar traced a line along his jawbone, but it did nothing to diminish the honesty she saw in his face. "I could not help but overhear your conversation with the shopkeeper," he said, and his voice carried a gentle, apologetic tone. "Forgive me for intruding on your business, but I have a proposition if you would hear it." Evelyn hesitated, knowing that a proper young woman should not engage in conversation with strange men on the street, but desperation made her bolder than propriety usually allowed. "What sort of proposition?" "My name is Benjamin James," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that surprised her. "I work for the Double Bar Ranch about 15 miles north of here. We have been on a long cattle drive and just got paid. The men are tired of beans and salt pork, and fresh eggs would be a welcome change. I heard you have 2 dozen there." "I do," Evelyn confirmed, hope flickering in her chest despite her attempts to keep her expectations low. "What were you hoping to get for them?" "Candles," she said honestly. "I need at least 8 to see us through the next few weeks." Benjamin James nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Those eggs are worth more than 8 candles, miss. Henderson is robbing you blind if he offered you less." "He offered 4, Evelyn admitted, feeling embarrassed by how little her hard work was valued. Something flashed in Benjamin's eyes, anger perhaps, but he kept his voice calm. "I will give you 12 candles for those eggs, and I will purchase them from Henderson myself, so you do not have to deal with his poor treatment." Evelyn stared at him, certain she had misheard. 12 candles, you heard correctly. "And if you have more eggs in the coming weeks, I will buy those too at the same rate. The men at the ranch would be grateful for fresh eggs regularly, and I would be happy to ensure you get fair value for your work." It was too generous, too unexpected, and Evelyn's first instinct was suspicion. "Why would you do this? You do not know me." Benjamin put his hat back on, but not before she saw something sad and distant cross his features. "Let us just say I know what it is like to be on the wrong end of a bad deal, and I have no love for men who take advantage of those with no other options. Will you accept my offer?" Every practical bone in Evelyn's body screamed at her to say yes immediately, but she forced herself to think clearly. "I would need to know this is not some sort of trick or jest." "It is neither," Benjamin assured her. "I will go into Henderson's store right now, purchase 12 candles with my own money, and bring them out to you. Then I will take your eggs back to the ranch. If you are comfortable with it, I can also arrange to stop by your property each week to pick up whatever eggs you have available." "Where is your farm located?" 3 miles east of town on the Old Creek Road," Evelyn said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Something about this man's straightforward manner and the respect in his tone made her want to trust him, even though they had just met. "I know the area," Benjamin said. "There is a small farmhouse with a red barn, if I remember correctly." "The barn used to be red," Evelyn corrected. "The paint has mostly weathered away now. It is just me and my father there." Benjamin's expression softened. "Wait here, I will return shortly." He disappeared into the store, and Evelyn stood in the street feeling as though she had stepped into some strange dream. Around her, Concord continued its usual afternoon routine. A wagon rumbled past, kicking up dust. 2 women across the street gossiped outside the seamstress shop, their parasols creating small circles of shade. A dog slept in the shadow of the saloon, unbothered by the heat. Everything was normal except for this extraordinary encounter with a cowboy who seemed determined to treat her fairly for no reason she could understand. True to his word, Benjamin emerged from the store several minutes later carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to Evelyn, and when she opened it, she found 12 white candles, each one perfect and new. "There is no trick," he said gently, seeing the disbelief still written on her face. "This is simply one person helping another, the way things should be." Evelyn looked down at the candles, then at her basket of eggs, then at this stranger who had just shown her more kindness than she had experienced in months. "I do not know how to thank you, Mr. James. Call me Benjamin, please, and no thanks are necessary. May I take the eggs now? I promise they will be well received at the ranch." She handed him the basket, and their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, a fleeting touch that somehow felt significant in a way Evelyn could not explain. Benjamin smiled at her, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes, and she found herself smiling back despite all the worry and exhaustion that had been weighing her down. "I will come by your farm next week if that suits you," he said. "Around midday on Wednesday, perhaps. That should give your hens time to produce another collection." "Wednesday would be fine," Evelyn agreed, clutching the package of candles to her chest. "I will have eggs ready for you." Benjamin nodded and turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her. "What is your name, miss?" "I realize I never asked." "Evelyn Norton." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Norton. I will see you on Wednesday." She watched him walk to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding tied further down the street, and mount with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. He tipped his hat to her one more time before riding off, the basket of eggs secured carefully in his saddlebag. Evelyn stood there long after he disappeared from view, trying to make sense of what had just happened and the strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with relief over the candles. The walk home seemed shorter than usual, or perhaps Evelyn was simply too distracted by her thoughts to notice the distance. The farmhouse came into view as she crested the small hill on Creek Road, and she felt the familiar mix of love and sadness that the sight always brought her. This had been her childhood home, the place where her parents had built a life through hard work and determination. Her father, Thomas Norton, had claimed this land when Evelyn was just a baby, back in 1854, and had transformed it from raw prairie into a functioning farm that had supported their family comfortably for years. But that was before the consumption had taken hold of him, before her mother had died from fever, before all the bad luck and hardship had piled up like stones on a grave. Now the fields lay mostly fallow, the barn was falling into disrepair, and Evelyn spent her days trying to hold together something that seemed determined to fall apart. She entered the house quietly, not wanting to disturb her father if he was sleeping. The main room was dim and stuffy, and she immediately went to open the windows, letting in what little breeze existed on this hot September afternoon. The house consisted of just 3 rooms, the main living area with its fireplace and table, a small bedroom where her father now spent most of his time, and an even smaller room that had once been hers, but now served primarily as storage since she had moved her bedroll into the main room to be closer if her father needed her during the night. "Evelyn," her father's voice called out, weak but alert. "Is that you?" "Yes, Papa," she answered, moving to his bedroom door. "I am back from town." Thomas Norton had once been a robust man, tall and strong with hands that could tame wild horses and build anything from wood and nails. Now he lay propped up on pillows, his frame diminished by illness, his face pale and gaunt. But his eyes, the same green color as Evelyn's own, still held the sharp intelligence and kindness that had defined him throughout his life. "Did Henderson give you a fair deal?" he asked, though they both knew the answer to that question. Evelyn decided to tell him the truth, knowing he would see through any lie. Henderson offered 4 candles for 2 dozen eggs, but something wonderful happened, Papa. A cowboy named Benjamin James was outside the store and he overheard us. He bought 12 candles with his own money and traded them for my eggs. And he said he would come back next week to buy more eggs at the same rate. Her father's eyebrows rose in surprise. A stranger did this? Yes. He works at the Double Bar Ranch and said the men there would appreciate fresh eggs. He seemed genuinely kind, Papa, not like he wanted anything improper in return. Thomas studied his daughter's face for a long moment, and Evelyn wondered what he saw there. The Double Bar Ranch, he said slowly. That is the Morrison property. John Morrison runs an honest operation from what I have heard. If this Benjamin James works for him, he is likely trustworthy. Relief washed over Evelyn, though she had not realized she was seeking her father's approval of the arrangement. He is coming by on Wednesday to pick up more eggs if we have them. We will have them, her father said firmly. You take good care of those hens, Evelyn. This could be the blessing we have been praying for. That night, Evelyn lit one of the new candles and placed it on the small table beside her father's bed so he could read. She sat nearby, mending a tear in one of his shirts, and tried not to think too much about Benjamin James and the unexpected kindness he had shown her. But her mind kept returning to his coffee-colored eyes, the respectful way he had removed his hat, and the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to her. She was 20 years old and had received attention from young men in Concord before, but none had ever made her feel the way she had felt in those brief moments on the street this afternoon. It was disconcerting and thrilling in equal measure, and she forced herself to focus on her mending before her imagination ran away with her entirely. The days until Wednesday passed slowly. Evelyn threw herself into farm work with renewed energy, determined to have a good collection of eggs ready when Benjamin returned. She repaired a section of the chicken coop that had been sagging, hauled water from the well for her small vegetable garden, and spent hours trying to patch the leak in the barn roof that had been growing worse with each rain. The physical labor exhausted her, but it also kept her mind occupied and made the nights pass more quickly. Her father seemed to improve slightly, perhaps bolstered by having something to look forward to, or perhaps simply having better light to read by in the evenings. He asked Evelyn questions about Benjamin, what he had looked like, exactly what he had said, and whether she thought he had been sincere. She answered as honestly as she could, admitting that she believed Benjamin's intentions were genuine, but that she remained cautiously hopeful rather than fully convinced. You are wise to be careful, her father said on Tuesday evening as Evelyn prepared their simple supper of cornbread and beans. But do not let caution prevent you from seeing goodness when it appears. Your mother always said that I was too suspicious of people's kindness, that I looked for ulterior motives where none existed. She was right. Sometimes people are simply good, Evelyn, and they help because it is the right thing to do. The mention of her mother brought the familiar ache to Evelyn's heart, but it was a gentler pain now, softened by time and sweet memories. I miss her, she said quietly, as do I every day. But she would want us to keep living, to accept help when it is offered, and to find joy where we can. Remember that. Wednesday morning dawned clear and hot, with the promise of another scorching afternoon ahead. Evelyn woke early, her stomach fluttering with nervousness that she tried to dismiss as foolish. She fed the chickens, collected the eggs with extra care, and counted them twice to be sure. 18 eggs, not quite as many as the week before, but still a respectable number. She washed each one gently and arranged them in the basket with clean straw to cushion them, then looked down at herself and realized she was still wearing her oldest work dress, stained with chicken droppings and dirt from morning chores. The realization that she cared what she looked like when Benjamin arrived both embarrassed and excited her. She told herself it was simply a matter of making a good impression on someone who was helping her family, but she knew it was more than that. She changed into her better dress, a simple blue cotton garment that her mother had made for her 2 years before her death. It was faded now and had been mended in several places, but it was clean and fitted her properly. She brushed her long, dark hair and pinned it up in a neat bun, allowing a few strands to soften the look around her face. Her father called out to her, and she went to check on him, finding him sitting up in bed with more color in his cheeks than she had seen in weeks. "You look lovely," he said with a knowing smile. "Is that for the benefit of our egg customer?" Evelyn felt heat rise to her face. "I simply wanted to look presentable, Papa. There is nothing wrong with that." "Nothing wrong at all," he agreed, but his eyes twinkled with amusement. "I would like to meet this Benjamin James, if he is agreeable to it. Will you invite him inside? If he has time, yes, I will ask him." Evelyn returned to the main room and busied herself with tidying, though the house was already as clean as she could make it with their limited resources. She rearranged the few items on the mantel, swept the floor again, and adjusted the curtains at least 3 times before admitting to herself that she was being ridiculous. Benjamin would likely arrive, exchange candles for eggs, perhaps exchange a few pleasantries, and then leave. There was no reason to expect anything more than a simple business transaction. Midday came and went with no sign of him. Evelyn tried not to feel disappointed, reminding herself that ranchers and cowboys kept irregular schedules and that something might have delayed him. But as the sun moved past its zenith and began its slow descent toward the western horizon, she began to accept that he was not coming. Perhaps the men at the Double Bar Ranch had not enjoyed the eggs as much as he had expected. Perhaps he had reconsidered the arrangement and decided it was not worth his time. Perhaps she had simply misunderstood his intentions entirely. She was about to take the basket of eggs back to the coop for storage when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching the farm. Her heart leaped, and she hurried to the window, trying not to appear too eager. A rider was indeed approaching, and as he drew closer, she recognized Benjamin's bay gelding and the tall figure in the saddle. Evelyn forced herself to walk calmly to the door instead of running, and she stepped outside just as Benjamin was dismounting. He saw her and smiled, removing his hat in greeting. "Miss Norton, I apologize for my late arrival. We had a situation with a broken fence that required immediate attention, and I could not leave until it was repaired." "I understand," Evelyn said, relieved that he had not simply forgotten or changed his mind. "Ranch work does not keep to a convenient schedule." "No, it certainly does not." He looked around the property, and Evelyn tried to see it through his eyes, the weathered buildings and overgrown fields. But if he judged them for their poverty, his face showed no sign of it. "This is a nice piece of land. Good water access from what I can see." "My father chose well when he claimed it," Evelyn said. "It has served us for many years." Benjamin's gaze returned to her, and she noticed he seemed to take in her appearance with approval, though he was gentleman enough not to comment on it directly. "I brought the candles as promised." "Same arrangement as before, 12 candles for however many eggs you have." "I have 18 today. Will that be acceptable?" "More than acceptable. The men were very pleased with the quality of the eggs last week. The cook made the best breakfast we have had in months, and I have been asked to secure more if possible." Evelyn went inside to fetch the basket, and when she returned, Benjamin had a package ready for her. This time, instead of 12 candles, there were 15. "You brought too many," she said, though her hands trembled slightly as she held the package. "Consider it a bonus for the extra eggs," Benjamin said easily. "And perhaps an apology for arriving so late today. That is very generous, but I cannot accept more than we agreed upon." "It would not be right." Benjamin studied her for a moment, his expression serious. "Miss Norton, may I speak plainly?" "Yes. You are clearly struggling here, and there is no shame in that. These are hard times, and from what I can see, you are doing the work of several people on your own. If I can make your life a bit easier by including a few extra candles, it costs me nothing but brings you some comfort. Please do not let pride prevent you from accepting help that is freely given." His words were gentle but firm, and Evelyn found she could not argue with the truth in them. "You are very kind, Benjamin. I'm not accustomed to such kindness from relative strangers." "Then perhaps we should remedy the stranger part," he said with a slight smile. "I know your name is Evelyn Norton, and you live here with your father. But I would like to know more if you are willing to share. For instance, why are you running this farm alone? Is your father unable to help?" Evelyn hesitated, wondering how much to reveal, but something about Benjamin's open, honest face made her want to trust him. "My father is ill with consumption. He has been bedridden for nearly 8 months now, and the doctor says there is little hope for recovery. Before that, we managed well enough together, but now I do what I can, which is not nearly enough to keep the farm running properly." Sympathy flickered across Benjamin's features. "I am sorry to hear that. Consumption is a terrible disease. My own mother died from it when I was 15. "I am sorry for your loss," Evelyn said softly. "It was 11 years ago now, but I still miss her. She was a strong woman, much like you seem to be." The comparison warmed Evelyn more than it probably should have. "My father would like to meet you if you have time. He wanted to thank the man who has been so helpful to us." "I would be honored to meet him," Benjamin said immediately. Evelyn led him into the house, suddenly nervous about what her father might say or do. Thomas Norton had always been protective of her, and she worried he might interrogate Benjamin or say something embarrassing. But when they entered her father's room, Thomas was sitting up alertly, his face composed and dignified despite his weakened state. "Mr. James," Thomas said, extending a thin hand. "I am Thomas Norton. My daughter has told me of your kindness to our family." Benjamin stepped forward and shook the offered hand carefully, clearly aware of the older man's fragility. "The kindness has been minimal, sir. Your daughter has fine laying hens, and the arrangement benefits both of us. Nevertheless, in times like these, fairness is a form of kindness, and I appreciate you treating Evelyn with the respect she deserves." Thomas studied Benjamin with shrewd eyes. "You work at the Double Bar Ranch?" "Yes, sir. I have been there for almost 2 years now. Before that, I worked on various ranches throughout Texas and up into Kansas." "A drifter, then, Papa," Evelyn said, embarrassed by the blunt question, but Benjamin did not seem offended. "I was, sir, for many years after my parents died. But I am looking to settle now, to find a place I can call home. Mr. Morrison at the Double Bar has hinted that he might make me foreman when his current foreman retires next year, which would give me the stability I have been seeking." Thomas nodded slowly. "John Morrison is a good judge of character. If he is considering you for foreman, you must have proven yourself valuable. How old are you, son?" "I am 26, sir." "And you have never married?" "Papa, that is hardly appropriate to ask," Evelyn protested, her face burning with embarrassment. Benjamin smiled at her obvious discomfort before answering. "No, sir, I have never married. The life of a traveling ranch hand does not lend itself well to building a family, but as I said, that is changing now." "Good," Thomas said, and Evelyn could see the approval in his eyes. "A man needs roots, needs something to work toward beyond just the next paycheck." I claimed this land when I was 23 years old, brought my new bride here, and built everything you see with my own hands. It gave me purpose, gave my life meaning. I hope you find the same, Mr. James." "Thank you, sir. That means a great deal coming from someone who has clearly built something worth being proud of." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Thomas asking about the Double Bar Ranch and Benjamin answering patiently, occasionally directing questions to Evelyn to include her in the discussion. She watched them talk, these two men from such different circumstances finding common ground in their shared understanding of hard work and integrity. And she felt something shift in her chest, some wall she had built around her heart beginning to crack. Finally, Thomas grew tired, his energy visibly waning, and Evelyn suggested they let him rest. Benjamin agreed immediately, thanking Thomas for his time and promising to return the following week if that suited everyone. As Evelyn walked him back outside, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the farm, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "Your father is a good man," Benjamin said as they reached his horse. "You can see the strength in him, even diminished by illness." "He was the strongest man I ever knew," Evelyn said, her voice catching slightly. "It is difficult watching him fade away, knowing there is nothing I can do to stop it." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, then said, "You are doing what matters most. You are here with him, making sure his final days have dignity and comfort. That is everything, Evelyn." It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal Miss Norton, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her despite the heat. She looked up at him, meeting his eyes, and saw such genuine understanding there that tears suddenly threatened to spill over. "I am sorry," she said quickly, blinking them back. "I do not usually become emotional like this. You have nothing to apologize for. Caring for someone you love while they are dying is the hardest thing in the world. Anyone who would not become emotional is not truly human." He reached out then, a slow, careful movement that gave her plenty of time to step back if she wished, and touched her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. Even through the fabric of her dress, she could feel the warmth of his hand, the solid strength of his presence, and she realized how long it had been since anyone had offered her this kind of support. "Thank you," she whispered. Benjamin withdrew his hand but did not step away. "I know we have only just met, but I want you to know that if you need anything, anything at all, you can send word to the Double Bar Ranch. If there is work that needs doing around the farm, repairs that need to be made, I would be happy to help during my free time." "I could not ask that of you," Evelyn protested. "You have already done so much. You are not asking. I am offering. There is a difference." She wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence and not become a burden on this kind man who already had his own responsibilities. But the truth was that there were dozens of tasks around the farm that were beyond her physical strength or skill. Jobs that her father would have handled easily in better days, but now remained undone. And Benjamin was looking at her with such earnest sincerity that refusing seemed almost insulting. "There is a section of the barn roof that leaks badly," she admitted, "and the well pump needs repair. I have tried to fix both but lack the proper tools and knowledge." "I will bring tools next week and take care of both," Benjamin said. "It will not take long and I will be glad to do it. I do not know how I will ever repay you for all this kindness." Benjamin mounted his horse and looked down at her with a smile that made her heart skip. "Perhaps you could prepare lunch for me while I work. I would count that as more than fair payment." "Lunch I can certainly manage," Evelyn agreed, smiling back at him. "Then it is settled. I will see you next Wednesday, Evelyn." He rode away, and she stood watching until he disappeared from sight, her hand unconsciously touching the spot on her shoulder where his hand had rested. The warmth had faded, but the feeling it had created remained, a small spark of something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of something that could grow into more if she was brave enough to let it. That night, as she lit one of the new candles for her father, Thomas looked at her with knowing eyes. He is a good man, that Benjamin James. Yes, he seems to be, and he is clearly interested in you, daughter. Evelyn busied herself adjusting the candle to avoid her father's gaze. He is simply being kind to people who need help. I have lived long enough to know the difference between simple kindness and a man's interest in a woman. The way he looked at you, the way his voice softened when he spoke your name, these are not the actions of someone merely conducting business. Even if that were true, Papa, what difference would it make? I cannot pursue any kind of relationship while you need me. My responsibility is here, taking care of you and the farm. Thomas reached out and grasped her hand with surprising strength. Listen to me, Evelyn. I will not be here much longer. We both know this, though neither of us wishes to speak it aloud. When I am gone, you will need someone to help you, someone to share the burdens of this life. If Benjamin James is willing to be that person, do not push him away out of some misplaced sense of duty to me. I am not pushing him away, Evelyn protested weakly. Not yet, but I can see you building walls in your mind, convincing yourself that you do not deserve happiness or companionship. Your mother did the same thing after her first husband died, nearly talked herself out of accepting my proposal when I asked her to marry me. She was certain she should not move on, should not allow herself to love again. But she did, and those years we had together were the greatest blessing of my life. Do not make the mistake of denying yourself that same possibility. Evelyn felt tears sliding down her cheeks now, unable to hold them back any longer. I am frightened, Papa. Of losing you, of being alone, of making wrong choices. Fear is natural, but do not let it rule you. Benjamin James rode out here today not because he needed eggs desperately, but because he wanted to see you again. A man does not offer to do farm repairs for a stranger unless he has deeper motivations. Give him a chance, Evelyn. Give yourself a chance. The following week passed in a strange state of anticipation. Evelyn found herself thinking about Benjamin constantly, wondering what he was doing at the ranch, whether he thought about her as well, what Wednesday would bring. She scolded herself for acting like a foolish girl, but the scolding did nothing to diminish the flutter in her stomach whenever her thoughts turned to him. She collected eggs daily, building up a good supply. She also planned what she would cook for lunch, settling on fried chicken, biscuits, and green beans from her garden. It was nothing fancy, but it was the best she could offer with her limited resources. She cleaned the house thoroughly, aired out the rooms, and even picked a few wildflowers to place in a jar on the table. On Tuesday night, she barely slept, and Wednesday morning found her up before dawn, cooking and preparing. By the time she heard hoofbeats approaching around noon, everything was ready. The chicken was staying warm by the fireplace, the biscuits were fresh from the oven, and she had changed into her blue dress again, telling herself it was simply because it was cleaner than her work dress. Benjamin arrived carrying a toolbox and a bundle of wooden shingles, and his face lit up when he saw her waiting on the porch. "Good afternoon, Evelyn. I brought supplies to fix your roof properly." "Thank you for coming," she said, suddenly shy. "The eggs are ready, and lunch will be prepared whenever you are ready to eat. Why do I not take care of the roof first while the sun is high, then we can have lunch after? Working on a full stomach makes a man sluggish. Whatever you prefer." Evelyn showed him to the barn, and Benjamin immediately set to work assessing the damage and planning his repairs. She watched for a few minutes, impressed by the confident way he moved and the obvious skill he possessed. Then she forced herself to return to the house, to let him work without distraction, though she found her gaze drawn repeatedly to the window where she could see him working on the barn roof. The repairs took nearly 2 hours, and when Benjamin finally climbed down and declared the job finished, he was sweating and covered in dust, but looking satisfied with his work. "That should hold for many years now," he told Evelyn. The shingles were of good quality, and I reinforced the underlying structure where it had weakened. "I cannot tell you how much I appreciate this," Evelyn said. "Let me pump some water so you can wash up before we eat." They worked the pump together, and Evelyn tried not to stare as Benjamin splashed water on his face and arms, washing away the dust and grime. He rolled down his sleeves and put his hat back on, then followed her into the house where the table was set with her mother's good plates and the simple meal she had prepared. Benjamin's eyes widened when he saw the food. "This is far more than I expected. You should not have gone to such trouble." "It is no trouble," Evelyn assured him, though she had indeed spent hours preparing it. "Please sit and eat." They sat across from each other at the small table, and Evelyn said a brief blessing before they began eating. Benjamin ate with obvious enjoyment, complimenting every dish and helping himself to seconds. The conversation flowed easily between them, moving from light topics like the weather and the ranch to deeper discussions about their hopes and dreams for the future. "When I was a child," Evelyn said, surprising herself with her openness, "I imagined I would grow up, marry a nice man from town, and have a house full of children while my husband worked the farm with my father. It seemed so simple then, so certain, but life had other plans." "Plans can change," Benjamin said. "That does not mean the core desires have to change with them. You can still have those things, just perhaps in a different way than you imagined." "Can I? Sometimes I feel as though I am trapped in this situation with no way out. When my father passes, I will be alone here with a failing farm and no prospects. Henderson and others in town have made it clear they think I should sell the property and move away, perhaps become a housekeeper or a seamstress for someone else. But this is my home, Benjamin. This is where my memories are, where my parents built their life together. I do not want to leave it." Benjamin set down his fork and looked at her intently. "Then do not leave it. There are other options, Evelyn, if you are willing to consider them." "What options?" He hesitated, and she could see him weighing his words carefully. "A woman alone cannot easily run a farm, that is true, but a married woman would have help, a partner to share the work and the responsibilities." The implications of his words hung in the air between them, and Evelyn felt her heart begin to race. "Are you suggesting that I should marry someone simply to save the farm?" "Not simply to save the farm, no. That would be wrong for both people involved. But if you were to marry someone who cared for you, someone who understood the value of this land and wanted to build a life here with you, that would be different. That would be a partnership based on mutual respect and affection that could grow into deeper love over time." Evelyn could not quite bring herself to ask the question that was screaming in her mind, so instead she said, "That is a very romantic notion, but finding such a person is not so simple." Benjamin reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "What if that person was already here? What if he had been thinking of little else but you since the moment he first saw you standing in that street in Concord, looking fierce and determined despite your obvious struggle? What if he had lain awake every night this past week wondering if it was too soon to speak his mind, too presumptuous to hope you might feel even a fraction of what he feels?" Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Benjamin, I know it has only been 2 weeks since we met," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "I know this must seem sudden and strange, but I am 26 years old, Evelyn, and I have met plenty of women in my travels. None of them made me feel what I felt that first day when you looked at me with those green eyes and tried so hard to be strong even though you were clearly at the end of your rope. None of them made me want to be better, to offer everything I have and everything I am just for the chance to see them smile. Tears were sliding down Evelyn's face again, but this time they were not tears of sadness or fear. "I have thought of little else but you as well," she admitted. "I told myself I was being foolish, that you were simply a kind man helping someone in need. But my heart knew differently." Benjamin did take her hand then, his calloused fingers gentle as they wrapped around hers. "I am not wealthy, and I do not have land of my own yet. But I am a hard worker, and Mr. Morrison has all but promised me the foreman position. That would mean better pay, enough to support a family and keep a farm running. I could help you save this place, Evelyn, not as some hired hand but as your husband if you would have me. We could build something together, something lasting and true." "This is madness," Evelyn whispered, but she was squeezing his hand tightly, not pulling away. "People will say we are being reckless, that we barely know each other. People will always have opinions. But they are not the ones living our lives. I believe some things are simply meant to be, and when you know, you know. I knew the moment I saw you that you were someone special, someone worth taking a chance on. If you feel even a possibility of the same, then give me that chance. Let me court you properly. Let us spend time together and see if this connection between us is as real as I believe it to be." Evelyn looked into his eyes and saw nothing but honesty and hope reflected there. Her father's words echoed in her mind, his encouragement not to let fear prevent her from accepting happiness. And her own heart, which had been silent and numb for so long, was suddenly singing with a possibility she had not dared to imagine. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I would like that very much." Benjamin's face broke into a brilliant smile and he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You have just made me the happiest man in Texas, Evelyn Norton." They finished their meal in a state of giddy excitement, talking about everything and nothing, learning the small details about each other that people in love want to know. Benjamin told her about growing up on a small ranch in East Texas, about losing both his parents by the time he was 16, about the years of drifting and the growing desire for stability that had led him to the Double Bar Ranch. Evelyn shared stories about her childhood on the farm, about her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's strength, about the dreams she had tucked away when responsibility became more important than hope. When it was time for Benjamin to leave, he walked to his horse slowly, clearly reluctant to go. Evelyn followed him, equally reluctant to see him ride away. "I will come back on Sunday afternoon if that is acceptable," he said. "I have the day off, and I thought perhaps we could take a walk together, talk some more." "I would like that," Evelyn agreed. "And I will continue to come every Wednesday for eggs and to help with whatever work needs doing around the farm. We will take this slowly, Evelyn, do this properly. I want your father's blessing, and I want the people in Concord to see that I am serious about my intentions toward you. People in Concord barely acknowledge my existence these days," Evelyn said with a trace of bitterness. "I am just the poor girl with the dying father and the failing farm." "Then we will change their perception," Benjamin said firmly. "You are so much more than that, and I will make sure everyone knows it." He rode away, and Evelyn floated back into the house feeling as though she had stepped into a wonderful dream. Her father was awake and eager to hear about the visit, and when Evelyn told him everything that had transpired, including Benjamin's declaration of feelings and his desire to court her properly, Thomas smiled with deep satisfaction. "I knew it," he said triumphantly. "That young man has good sense and a good heart. You have my blessing, daughter, not that you truly needed it, but I give it gladly and with the hope that I might live long enough to see you married to him." "Papa, do not speak like that." "Why not?" "It is the truth, and we should face truth directly. I am dying, Evelyn, but I am not dead yet, and I would dearly love to see you settled and happy before I go." "How long do you think this courtship needs to be?" Evelyn laughed despite the seriousness of the topic. "I do not know. A few months, perhaps, long enough to be certain of our feelings and to make proper plans." "A few months I can probably manage," Thomas said, "though I would not object to a shorter timeline if you and Benjamin find yourselves certain sooner rather than later." The weeks that followed were the happiest Evelyn had known in years. Benjamin came every Sunday to spend time with her, and they walked the property together, talking and learning each other's hearts. He came every Wednesday with candles for eggs and spent the afternoons making repairs around the farm, fixing the well pump, mending fences, and completing 100 small tasks that had been beyond Evelyn's ability to handle alone. As October gave way to November, Benjamin began bringing Evelyn into town with him, making it clear to everyone in Concord that they were courting. He treated her with obvious respect and affection, buying her small gifts he could afford: a new hair ribbon, a packet of seeds for her garden, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. The people in town began to look at her differently, no longer with pity or dismissal, but with a new kind of interest. Jacob Henderson still drove hard bargains, but even he seemed to moderate his greed slightly when Benjamin was present. Thomas's health fluctuated, some days better than others, but he remained alert and engaged with everything happening around him. He and Benjamin developed a warm relationship, often talking for hours about ranching, farming, and the practical matters of building a life. Thomas began teaching Benjamin the specifics of running the Norton farm, sharing knowledge about the land, the water sources, and the challenges unique to their property. On a cool evening in late November, after Benjamin had left following his Sunday visit, Thomas called Evelyn to his bedside with unusual urgency in his voice. "I need to speak with you about something important," he said. Evelyn sat beside him, concerned by his serious tone. "What is it, Papa?" "I have been thinking about the future, about what will happen to this farm when I am gone. Legally, it will pass to you as my only heir, but a woman alone will face challenges in claiming and keeping property. Men like Henderson will circle like vultures, trying to convince you to sell for far less than it is worth, or worse, trying to claim you cannot manage it alone and should be forced to sell." "Benjamin will help me," Evelyn said. "We have talked about this." "I know, and that is good. But I want to make certain everything is legally sound and protected. I have asked Benjamin to ride into town tomorrow and bring back the lawyer, Silas Martin. I want to ensure my will is properly written and filed, and I want to add provisions that will protect you and this land." "Papa, talking about your will makes it feel like you are giving up." Thomas shook his head weakly. "I am not giving up, I am being practical, and there is something else I want to discuss with you, something I have been considering for several weeks now." "What is it?" "I want to see you married before I die, Evelyn. I want to know that you will be cared for, that you will not face the world alone. You and Benjamin clearly love each other, even if you have not yet spoken those words aloud. I can see it in how you look at each other, how you light up when he arrives, how he cannot take his eyes off you. Why wait months for something you are both already certain of?" Evelyn felt her face flush. "We have only been courting for 6 weeks, Papa. People will think it's scandalous if we marry so quickly. People thought it scandalous when your mother, a widow, agreed to marry a man she had known for only 2 months. But we did not care what people thought, and we had 20 beautiful years together before she died. Time is not what matters, Evelyn. What matters is the depth of feeling and the commitment to making a life together work. But what about Benjamin? He might not be ready for such a quick marriage. He wanted to do this properly, to court me respectfully. Then ask him, Thomas said simply. Talk to him honestly about what you want and what I have said. I believe you will find he is more than willing to move forward quickly. Men know when they have found their match, daughter, and that young man knows he has found his in you. The next day, Benjamin arrived with the lawyer as requested, and Evelyn waited nervously while the men conducted their business in her father's room. When they finally emerged, Silas Martin assured her that everything was in order and that the property would legally transfer to her upon her father's death with no complications. After the lawyer left, Benjamin stayed for supper, and Evelyn worked up the courage to raise the topic her father had introduced. Benjamin, may I ask you something personal? Of course. You can ask me anything. They were sitting on the porch in the cool November evening, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red. Evelyn took a deep breath and said, "When you first spoke of courting me, you said you wanted to do things properly, to take our time. Do you still feel that way?" Benjamin looked at her curiously. "I want whatever makes you comfortable, Evelyn. Why do you ask?" "My father spoke to me last night about his wishes for the future. He wants to see me married before he dies, and he suggested that perhaps we do not need to wait months if we are already certain of our feelings." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, and Evelyn feared she had been too forward, had pushed too hard. But then he reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I am already certain," he said quietly. "I was certain the day I met you, if I am being completely honest. The courting period was for your benefit, to give you time to be sure of me, to build trust and comfort. But if you are asking me whether I am ready to marry you and begin our life together, the answer is absolutely yes. I would marry you tomorrow if that was what you wanted." Relief and joy flooded through Evelyn. "I do not need more time either, Benjamin. I love you. I think I have loved you from the beginning, even when I tried to convince myself I was being foolish." "You love me," Benjamin repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Yes, I love you." He stood and pulled her gently to her feet, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "I love you too, Evelyn Norton. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you face every challenge with determination. I love how you care for your father with such devotion, and I love the way you look at me like I am someone worth believing in. I want to spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of that belief." Then he kissed her, a soft, gentle kiss that held the promise of all the days to come, and Evelyn felt the last of her walls crumble away, leaving nothing but love and hope in their place. They went inside to tell her father, finding him awake and alert. When they announced their decision to marry as soon as arrangements could be made, Thomas's face shone with happiness. "This is the best news an old man could receive," he said, his voice strong despite his weakened body. "When?" "As soon as the Reverend can perform the ceremony," Benjamin said. "This week if possible. I will need to speak with Mr. Morrison about taking a few days away from the ranch, but he is a reasonable man and has known for some time about my intentions toward Evelyn." "Do it," Thomas urged. "Do not wait. Life is too uncertain to postpone joy." The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Benjamin rode to the Double Bar Ranch and spoke with John Morrison, who not only gave his blessing and permission for time away, but also offered to stand as witness at the wedding, and invited the newlyweds to a celebratory dinner at the ranch. The Reverend in Concord agreed to perform a simple ceremony at the Norton farmhouse on the upcoming Saturday, giving them just 4 days to prepare. Evelyn had no money for a wedding dress, but she carefully cleaned and pressed her mother's best dress, a simple cream-colored garment that fit her reasonably well. Benjamin bought a new shirt and had his only suit cleaned and mended. They kept the arrangement simple, planning to exchange vows in front of her father's bed so he could witness the ceremony without the strain of moving to another room. Word spread through Concord about the upcoming wedding, and to Evelyn's surprise, several townspeople showed unexpected kindness. The seamstress, a widow named Martha Bell, appeared at the farm on Thursday with a veil she had made from lace left over from another project. The baker's wife brought a small cake as a wedding gift. Even Henderson, the mercantile owner, sent a package containing a set of good candles and a note offering his congratulations. "People are not all bad," Thomas observed when Evelyn showed him the gifts. "Sometimes they simply need to see something worth celebrating to remember their better nature." Saturday arrived clear and cold, the first truly cold day of the approaching winter. Evelyn woke early, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. This was her wedding day, something she had imagined countless times as a girl but had stopped believing would ever happen. And yet here it was, about to become real. Martha Bell arrived mid-morning to help Evelyn prepare, styling her hair and helping her into the dress and veil. When Evelyn looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the glowing young woman staring back at her. Was this really her, about to marry a wonderful man who loved her? Benjamin arrived at noon accompanied by John Morrison and the Reverend. He looked handsome and nervous in his clean suit, and when he saw Evelyn, his face transformed with awe and love. "You are beautiful," he breathed, and Evelyn felt beautiful for the first time in her life. They gathered in Thomas's small bedroom, keeping the ceremony brief as the Reverend had suggested given the circumstances. Thomas sat propped up in bed, tears streaming down his weathered face as he watched his daughter marry the man he had come to love like a son. The vows were simple and traditional. Benjamin promised to love, honor, and cherish Evelyn for as long as they both lived. Evelyn made the same promises, her voice steady and sure. They had no rings, but Benjamin tied a piece of rawhide around Evelyn's finger as a symbol of his commitment, promising to replace it with a proper ring as soon as he could afford one. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared. "Benjamin, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle and sweet, appropriate for the witnesses present, but it held the depth of everything they felt for each other. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears, and Thomas was openly weeping with joy. "Come here, both of you," Thomas said, his voice weak but filled with emotion. Benjamin and Evelyn moved to his bedside, and Thomas placed his thin hand over both of theirs. "You have given me the greatest gift I could receive, the knowledge that my daughter will be loved and cared for. Benjamin, you have my blessing and my gratitude. Care for her, protect her, and build a good life together on this land. Evelyn, my beautiful girl, be happy. Your mother and I both wanted that for you above all else." "Thank you, Papa," Evelyn whispered, kissing his forehead, "for everything." John Morrison invited everyone to share the simple meal that had been prepared, and they celebrated in the main room of the farmhouse, toasting the bride and groom with cider and sharing stories. It was not a grand wedding by any measure, but it was filled with genuine warmth and happiness, and Evelyn knew she would treasure these memories forever. As evening approached, the Reverend and John Morrison prepared to leave, offering final congratulations. Morrison pulled Benjamin aside for a private word, and Evelyn saw him hand Benjamin something before mounting his horse. After their guests had departed, Benjamin showed her what Morrison had given him, a small leather pouch containing wages. "He paid me a bonus," Benjamin said, seeming overwhelmed. "Said it was a wedding gift and that I should take the next week off to spend with my new wife. He is a generous man. He clearly values you," Evelyn said, wrapping her arms around her husband's waist. Her husband. The word felt strange and wonderful. That night, they made a comfortable bed for themselves in the main room, wanting to be close if Thomas needed anything during the night, but also desiring privacy for their first night as husband and wife. Benjamin was gentle and patient with Evelyn, understanding her nervousness, and their union was tender and filled with love. The following weeks brought both joy and sorrow. Thomas seemed to rally after the wedding, his spirits lifted by seeing Evelyn settled and happy. He spent his days talking with Benjamin about the farm, sharing decades of accumulated knowledge and wisdom. Benjamin listened carefully, asking questions and making plans for improvements he would implement in the spring. Evelyn had never been happier. Having Benjamin beside her transformed everything about her life. The work that had seemed overwhelming when she faced it alone became manageable with his help. The house felt like a home again, instead of just a place of slow dying. She and Benjamin talked for hours each evening, sharing their thoughts and dreams, building the foundation of their life together. But Thomas's improved spirits could not overcome the progression of his disease. As December arrived, he began to weaken noticeably, sleeping more, eating less, struggling more with each breath. On a cold night 2 weeks before Christmas, with snow falling softly outside and Evelyn and Benjamin keeping vigil beside his bed, Thomas Norton passed away peacefully in his sleep. The grief was profound but not unexpected. Evelyn wept in Benjamin's arms, mourning the loss of the father who had shaped her life and taught her strength. But even in her sorrow, she felt gratitude that he had lived long enough to see her married and to know she would not face the future alone. They buried Thomas in the small family plot beside Evelyn's mother, and the reverend spoke words of comfort over the grave. Several people from Concord attended the funeral, offering their condolences and respect for a man who had been part of their community for over 20 years. After the funeral, Benjamin held Evelyn close and said, "We will honor him by making this farm thrive again, by building the life here that he dreamed of when he first claimed this land. His legacy will live on through us and through our children when they come." The winter months were hard but not unbearable. Benjamin continued working at the Double Bar Ranch, but he spent every free moment at the farm, and Morrison was understanding about his need to help Evelyn through her grief. They worked together to prepare the farm for spring, planning which fields to plant, repairing equipment and dreaming of the future. As January turned to February, Evelyn began to suspect she might be with child. She waited to be certain before telling Benjamin, but when her suspicions were confirmed, she could not contain her joy. She told him one evening after supper, watching his face transform with wonder and delight. "A baby," he repeated, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Evelyn confirmed, laughing at his stunned expression. "Sometime in late summer, I believe." Benjamin swept her into his arms, spinning her around carefully before setting her down and kneeling to place his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I am your father, and I promise to love you and protect you always." Tears streamed down Evelyn's face as she watched her husband talk to their unborn child, and she marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few short months. Less than a year ago, she had been alone and desperate, bartering eggs for candles with no hope for the future. Now she had a husband who loved her, a baby on the way, and real hope that the farm could thrive again. Spring arrived with a burst of renewal and growth. Benjamin's hard work and knowledge brought new life to the fields as he planted crops and made improvements to the irrigation system. The hens continued to lay prolifically, and Benjamin expanded the coop, planning to grow their egg business. John Morrison made good on his promise, and promoted Benjamin to foreman, which came with a significant increase in pay and the flexibility to manage his time between the ranch and his own farm. As summer approached, Evelyn's pregnancy became obvious, and she bloomed with health and happiness. The women of Concord, who had once ignored her, now stopped to congratulate her and offer advice. Martha Bell became a good friend, visiting regularly and helping Evelyn prepare for the baby's arrival. On a hot August evening, Evelyn went into labor. Benjamin rode frantically to fetch the midwife, and Martha Bell came to sit with Evelyn until she arrived. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but finally, as the sun reached its zenith, Evelyn gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Benjamin was allowed into the room as soon as the baby was cleaned and swaddled, and the look on his face when he held his son for the first time was something Evelyn would remember forever. Pure love, pure wonder, pure joy. "What should we name him?" Benjamin asked, his voice choked with emotion. Evelyn had been thinking about this for months. "I would like to name him Thomas after my father, if that suits you." "Thomas James," Benjamin said, testing the name. "I think it is perfect. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, son." Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he brought even more joy and purpose to their lives. Evelyn recovered quickly from the birth, and soon the farmhouse rang with the sounds of a baby's cries and laughter, the sounds of a family building a life together. As autumn arrived again, marking nearly a year since Benjamin had first spoken to Evelyn on that street in Concord, they stood together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Thomas slept peacefully in Evelyn's arms, and Benjamin's arm was wrapped around her shoulders. "You ever think about that day we met?" Evelyn asked. "When I was trying to trade eggs for candles and you offered to help me." "I think about it often," Benjamin said. "It was the luckiest day of my life." "I thought you were crazy," Evelyn admitted. "Too kind to be real, too good to be true." "And now I know you are real and good and mine," she said, leaning into his warmth. "You bought my whole coop of eggs that day, but you gave me so much more. You gave me hope and love and a future I never dreamed possible." Benjamin kissed the top of her head. "You gave me those same things, Evelyn. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to put down roots and build something lasting. We saved each other, I think." They stood in comfortable silence, watching night fall over their land, their home, their life together. The farm was thriving now, producing enough crops and eggs to support them comfortably with extra to sell. Benjamin was respected as the foreman of the Double Bar Ranch, and their reputation in Concord had grown to the point where people sought their advice and friendship. The years that followed brought more children, 2 daughters and another son, filling the farmhouse with noise and love and chaos. Benjamin expanded the farm gradually, buying additional acreage when they could afford it, and building a larger barn and a proper chicken coop that housed over 50 laying hens. The egg business grew until they were supplying most of Concord and several neighboring towns, making a comfortable living from what had started as Evelyn's desperate attempt to trade for candles. Thomas, their firstborn, grew into a strong boy who loved the farm and followed his father everywhere, learning the work and the land. The other children were equally healthy and happy, and Evelyn often reflected on how blessed she was, how different her life had turned out from those dark days when she had thought she would lose everything. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin surprised Evelyn with a gift he had been saving for years to afford. A beautiful gold ring set with a small emerald that matched her eyes. He slipped it onto her finger, removing the piece of rawhide that she had worn since their wedding day and that she had refused to replace even when they could afford to do so. "I wanted you to have this," he said. Something beautiful for the most beautiful woman I know." Evelyn looked at the ring sparkling in the lamplight, then at her husband's face, still so handsome and dear to her, more so even than when they had first met. "The rawhide was beautiful to me because it represented your promise and your love. But I will treasure this as well, as another symbol of everything we have built together." They kissed, a kiss that held 10 years of love and partnership and shared struggles and triumphs. Around them, their children played and laughed. The farm hummed with productive life, and the future stretched ahead filled with promise. Evelyn sometimes walked to her parents' graves on the small hill behind the house and told them about her life, about Benjamin and the children, about how the farm was thriving again. She liked to think they knew that somehow they could see what she had built and were proud of her strength and choices. "I did it, Papa," she would say, standing between the two simple headstones. "I saved the farm and I found love just like you wanted for me." And it all started with eggs and candles, and a cowboy who saw me when I felt invisible. As their children grew older and began to have families of their own, the Norton James farm became a gathering place for Sunday dinners and holidays, filled with the laughter of grandchildren and the warmth of family bonds. Benjamin eventually retired from his foreman position at the Double Bar Ranch to focus entirely on their own property, and together, he and Evelyn built it into one of the most successful farms in the region. They never forgot their humble beginnings, and they made a point of helping others who struggled as they once had. When they saw young couples starting out with nothing, or widows trying to maintain farms alone, or anyone facing the kind of desperation Evelyn had felt that day in Concord, they offered assistance without judgment or expectation of repayment. They gave freely because they remembered what it meant to receive kindness when you needed it most. On a warm spring evening many years later, Benjamin and Evelyn sat on their porch much as they had done countless times before, but now their hair was gray and their bodies moved more slowly. They watched their grandchildren play in the yard, their own children visiting with spouses and talking about crops and weather and all the ordinary concerns of farm life. "You have any regrets?" Evelyn asked, taking Benjamin's weathered hand in hers. "Not a single one," he said without hesitation. "You? Only that we did not have more years together. That time moves so quickly." Benjamin smiled and squeezed her hand. "Then we will make the most of whatever time we have left. And when we are gone, we will leave behind children and grandchildren who know how to work hard and love well, and a farm that will support them for generations. That is a legacy worth being proud of, Evelyn." "It started with 24 eggs and a desperate woman in need of candles," Evelyn mused. "It started with two people brave enough to take a chance on each other," Benjamin corrected. "The eggs and candles were just the excuse that brought us together. Love did the rest." As the sun set on another beautiful day, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Evelyn leaned her head on Benjamin's shoulder and breathed in the scent of the land they had nurtured together for so many years. The chickens clucked softly in their coop, the coop that had started with a few scrawny hens and now housed dozens of productive layers. The fields stretched out green and growing, full of promise for another good harvest. And all around them was the evidence of a life well lived, built on a foundation of love, hard work, and the simple kindness of a cowboy who had seen a woman in need and decided to help. Their story would be told by their children and grandchildren for generations to come. The romantic tale of how Benjamin James had bought Evelyn Norton's whole coop of eggs that day in Concord, and in doing so, had bought her future and given her everything she had ever dreamed of and more. It became family legend, embellished and retold, but always returning to the same simple truth at its core. Love found them when they least expected it, in the most ordinary of circumstances, and it transformed everything. That was the real magic. Not that a handsome cowboy had ridden into town and swept a poor farm girl off her feet, but that two people had recognized something worth fighting for in each other, and had committed to building a life together no matter the obstacles. Years later, when Benjamin and Evelyn had both passed on peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, as if neither could bear to be without the other for long, their children found letters they had written to each other throughout their marriage. Love letters, simple notes, expressions of affection and appreciation that painted a picture of a deep and abiding partnership. One letter from Benjamin to Evelyn, written on their 25th anniversary, captured the essence of their relationship perfectly. My dearest Evelyn, 25 years ago today, I married the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I had ever known. You were standing in a dusty street trying to trade eggs for candles, and I was a drifter looking for a place to belong. We found each other, and in finding each other, we found ourselves. You made me want to be better, to build something lasting, to put down roots and grow. Every day with you has been a gift, even the hard days, even the days when the crops failed or the children were sick or money was tight. Because we faced those days together, and together we were always strong enough to overcome whatever challenges came our way. I love you more today than I did when we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for saying yes to a crazy cowboy who offered you more candles than your eggs were worth. Thank you for taking a chance on love when you had every reason to protect your heart. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Forever yours, Benjamin. The letter was found pressed between the pages of Evelyn's Bible, carefully preserved, clearly read and reread countless times over the years. And tucked into the same pages was Evelyn's response, written the same day. My beloved Benjamin, you say I was brave, but you were the brave one. You saw a woman at the end of her rope, and instead of taking advantage as many would have, you offered kindness and respect. You saw potential in me when I could not see it in myself. You gave me hope when I had none left. These 25 years have been the greatest adventure of my life, and I would not trade a single moment of them, not even the difficult times, because those times taught us how strong we are together. You are my partner, my love, my home. When I look at our children and grandchildren, when I look at this thriving farm, when I look at the life we have built from practically nothing, I am filled with gratitude and wonder. How did I get so lucky? How did I deserve someone like you? I do not know the answers, but I know enough to be thankful for whatever twist of fate brought you to Concord that September day in 1876. I love you beyond words, beyond measure, beyond time itself. Always and forever, your Evelyn. Their children read these letters at the joint funeral service, and there was not a dry eye in the church. The story of Benjamin and Evelyn James became the kind of love story that people told their own children and grandchildren. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary romances begin in the most ordinary moments, and that true love, when nurtured with care and commitment, can transform everything. The farm continued to thrive under the management of their eldest son Thomas, and eventually his children. The chicken coop, now a sprawling operation that supplied eggs throughout the region, stood as a testament to humble beginnings and steady growth. A small plaque was placed on the original coop building, the one Benjamin had expanded all those years ago, reading simply, "Where it all began, 1876. Visitors to the farm often asked about the plaque, and whoever was giving the tour would smile and tell them the story. The story of a young woman bartering eggs for candles in town, and a cowboy who bought her whole coop and her future, and in doing so, found his own future as well. It was a love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the Texas frontier. A tale of two people who found each other at just the right moment and built something beautiful and lasting from almost nothing. It had all the elements of the best romances: struggle and hope, kindness and courage, love and commitment, and a happily ever after that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And it all started with 24 eggs, 12 candles, and two hearts brave enough to take a chance on each other. That was the magic and the miracle of Benjamin and Evelyn James, a love that began in desperation and grew into something that lasted not just their lifetime but generations beyond, a legacy of love that would never be forgotten.